Now, branding and bureaucracy are going to be the focus of our next couple of interviews. And before we begin, well, our very first speaker is Danish author and one of the world's leading global branding strategists, Martin Lindstrom, straight off of the main stage, where I know you left people with a lot of food for thought. And we will take some questions in a moment. For anyone who wasn't listening, just give us the key takeaways from some heavy topics, really.
It was very heavy, I have to say. Well, listen, the story is very simple. We, right now, are moving into what's called Web 3.0. And the story is very simple. I don't think a lot of us have taken it seriously so far. But one of my key messages is, it's not a question about whether it will become a reality, but when it will become a reality. All estimates, according to McKinsey, now is showing that 2030, we will see a turnover in the metaverse of $5 trillion. Now, that's the same as the entire GDP of Japan. So this is serious stuff. And my message really today was three things. One is, what are the ethical consequences of this? Because there's a lot. The second thing is, how do we prepare for it? And the third thing is, what should our stand be about how we're going to handle it as human beings? So these are really the things I addressed at the keynote speech.
Great. Well, we are very grateful for that. We're going to switch focus a little bit and talk about bureaucracy, because you've written a big book suggesting that people can get rid of this in 90 days. Tell us a bit about that and what the response has been.
I am tired of bureaucracy in organizations. I mean, we work with bureaucracy in most of the major companies around the world. And the issue is today in organizations, they are so stuffed with stuff they're doing, which is making their productivity rate really go down a lot. So here's the issue. When we look at companies, the average productivity rate now is 23%. That means more than 70% is waste of time in PowerPoint slides and Microsoft Excel spreadsheet and all this stuff. So really what we decided to do was to figure out how we can turn this around. And this is a fun story. I actually did some work for a bank called Standard Chartered Bank in the UK. And during a workshop, this lady, she came up to me, she said, "I'm resigning. Martin, I don't want to work on this bank anymore." "Oh, you can't do it. I mean, that would be my reputation." So we sat down and I said to her, "Listen, what should we do to change bureaucracy in your bank? It's 88,000 staff." She said, "Why don't we start a ministry of common sense?" So we started up a ministry of common sense in the bank. And it basically was this place where you could submit all the stupidities one by one, turn them around to a fix. Now, within the first year, more than 3,000 stupidities was vacuum cleaned out of the bank.
Wow.
And that really became the title of my book, The Ministry of Common Sense, and a way for me to reconnect companies with consumers and customers, because it's disconnecting. We're so busy with ourselves, with our rules and regulations and bureaucracy and all that stuff, sitting behind a Zoom call or behind Microsoft Teams, that we are slowly losing touch with what matters with the customer.
Exactly. So there will be clients like the bank that you mentioned that are open to change. But I can imagine there's a lot of other companies, they don't see it as bureaucracy. They're quite proud of the processes and things that they've developed. Have you had any pushback from people?
Oh, all the time. I call that the immune system, the defense mechanism for change. I want to tell you guys a story. So it's an experiment done with chickens. They were put into a chicken cage and stuck there for half a year. One day, they were let out on the beautiful green grass, and the chickens went out. And what do you think happened? After 30 seconds, they turned back and went straight back into the chicken cage again.
Safety, yeah.
I call that the chicken cage syndrome. And what we've learned is that the fear of the unknown is really what we call the immune system, the defense mechanism for change. A lot of companies now are suffering from an immune system, and there's lots of different reasons why, which we can talk about later on. But the fact is that people's motivation in organizations is going down a lot. That's the reason why we see the great resignation in the US, and that's the reason why the happiness level is just going down. So that's the reason why I wanted to solve this, because it was what I learned from our clients, which frustrated them and frustrated me, right?
Yeah, we've been talking a bit about the Great Resignation, also the phenomenon of quiet quitting, where people are just doing the bare minimum. But you talked about people wanting safety, and obviously we know that there are turbulent times ahead. We're facing an economic recession, we've got the energy price hikes. So a lot of people might be thinking, oh, now's not the time for me to take a risk to change my processes. what would you say to them?
Well, here's what's so important to understand. Let's just go back in time. Some years ago, 3 young kids were smoking weeds in a dorm room in San Francisco. Off the head, right? They shoot a photo, a selfie, and they post it online. Of course, hell breaks loose, right? Mom and dad is calling them the day after, and they say to each other, those 3 kids, I wish I could retract those photos. Now, guess what? That became the foundation for Snapchat, today a $50 billion company. So what did we learn out of that story? When you are a small startup, you have a high degree of empathy, the ability to put yourself in the shoes of another person and feel what they're feeling, right? But as you grow bigger as a company, lawyers are coming in, we have more bureaucracy, the red tape comes, and you slowly are removed from empathy. Now, this is what's so interesting. There's a direct correlation between empathy and common sense. Both of them is to see the world from a different point of view. What we now know today is the less common sense you have, the less empathy, less common sense. So one of the things we try to do is to push empathy through organizations so it connects it's better to the customers rather than being busy with yourself.
And what does that look like in reality? How practically can you see that working?
Well, I'll give you one example, which is, let's go to the banking industry in China. So another large bank approached us and they said, hey, we have a problem. We don't have a lot of loans being issued. I said, why? Well, the reps goes out, they sign up a loan, they come back to risk and credit rejects everything. So I said, well, why don't we take risk, credit, and the reps into the offices of the small businesses across China, which we did. And it's never happened before in banking, by the way. They went out there, risk and credit said, wow, I like these guys, right? They came back home and it was risk and credit saying, hey, we should do a loan. And suddenly what we realized was 2 things. The numbers of loans went up and actually the risk went down. Over 2 years, we halved the risk. And this is a very simple initiative you can do where it was frustrating the reps, it was frustrating the credit, it was frustrating the clients and customers, and it was fixed with one little idea, which, by the way, was not my idea, is one idea out of 2,000 ideas from the Ministry of Common Sense.
Wow. Awesome to hear those real-life anecdotes. We're getting loads of questions for you, Martin, so I'm going to bring in some of those now. Some of them reflecting on your conversation about the metaverse. This one from VP says, what should we do to make offline life, brackets in real life, more preferable?
Yeah.
What would it take?
Well, listen, this is super important. We compete on the terms of online. So online has unlimited stuff, always accessible, always open, right? You do the opposite. In 2003, I wrote a book called Brand Sense. It was about our 5 senses, and we developed all the strategies for Apple and all this stuff back then to understand how you embed the senses into your world. When I go into crappy supermarkets today, I could just as well go online. But if I go into a supermarket where I smell the food, I can touch, I can taste things, the service is amazing, I want to be part of that physical world. People don't want to be part of the metaverse, right? But if we compete with the terms of technology and create these streamlined clinical experiences where emotions are wiped out of things, do you know what? Then I'd rather be in the metaverse. So I think the case is here, don't compete on online. Find the measures around the senses and make it real and physical. I'll give you an example. I don't own a phone.
Wow.
I haven't had a phone for 5 years. Why is that? I'll tell you there's 3 reasons why. One, when you tried it, you sit in a bar, you're waiting for someone, and the person is late. What's the first thing you do?
Go on your phone.
You grab your phone, you do something with the phone, anything so you don't look like a loser, right? 2, you don't see things anymore. But the third thing, which is the worst, we never get bored anymore. And boredom is the foundation for creativity, is that pause in life where we reflect and learn from our surroundings. Now we sit on bloody Zoom on Teams and think we can control the consumer through a remote control. It's BS. So my opinion about this is very simple. Do what we're best at in the physical world, use our 5 senses, and then in the metaverse, there's some other advantages. but don't make it too appealing over there, right?
So are all your friends always on time now? Or what do you do for those moments when you're waiting for someone in a bar?
I don't have any friends. I'm just kidding. No, listen. I think this is about teaching. It sounds so arrogant. Don't get me wrong here. I think it's about teaching your surroundings. When you have a phone, it's so easy to say, I'm 5 minutes late. First of all, I did that without a phone and went into panic and almost raped the taxi driver to persuade him to use his phone to tell I was late, right? It was really not a sustainable solution. So what I learned was to be on time. It took me a year to be on time because I couldn't warn anyone. Now, my friends have realized if they're not on time, I'm leaving. Just like you and I did when we were slightly younger. Meet me at the corner at 6 p.m. And if you're not there, 2 options. Either he's dead or else he don't like me. But it's not really where we are today, where everything is moved and delayed all the time as it is in our world, right?
Brilliant. More questions. I want to try and get through a couple more before we wrap this. Janne says, what could be the positive use cases of metaverse? For example, in terms of productivity and innovations by experiencing an industrial metaverse.
Oh, there is so much stuff. I mean, this is really, I'll give you an example. So if you take the airline industry, right? The airline industry today, 65% of all spare parts in an aircraft are fake, okay? Now, in the future, there's something called a lava code. It's a replacement of the QR code, which is going to be put on every spare part. So you can see that spare part is original and is not being faked. It's going into what we call a blockchain database. What you will see happening in the future is the blockchain will underwrite everything in our universe, and authenticity will be copying down to that. So that will be when people claim they're supporting the environment and they're bullshitting, you will go in through a lava code and actually see if it's true or not. So the underlying foundation for B2B companies will be blockchain, and that will then lift into the metaverse.
Yeah, really interesting that there can be more transparency,
Absolutely.
Even though there are obviously challenges. But that links into this next question from an anonymous writer. They say, what kind of regulatory system should be built for the metaverse? Referring to, for instance, the risk for exploitation, abuse, including sexual abuse, fraud, disinformation, those sorts of things.
Wow, it's a really good, thanks for asking that question.
I mean, we haven't had that for the internet, and we've...
No, we haven't, and it really, I'm so hurt about it because I feel we're going so much further than we should. Number one, all of you should write down an ethical code. I really, really mean it. It's not BS, because if we don't do it now and if we don't fight for that code, we are lost. And I tell you, I've been spending so much time on this, we're lost. Period number one. Number two, we, from our side, are now taking the 1,000 largest companies in the world, okay? And we are uniting them, and we are going to governments around the world and setting the new code for what ethics should be. Now, we have some of the biggest philosophers and experts in the world helping to set the guidelines of what ethics is going to be. It's a whole special team, a panel which is overseeing that. So we come with our experiments. We say, hey, what is your view about this? And then we set a code which is on one hand fulfilling the commercial needs without going on compromise on the ethical side. So we are fighting for it. And if any one of you want to be part of that, just go into engineeringourdreams.com, sign up, and we will keep you posted on what we learn.
Yeah.
And hopefully, we're creating a legacy now, right?
Let's see. Martin Lindstrom, thank you so much for sharing your perspective. Great to have you here on the HS Visio stage. Let's give him a big round of applause, everyone.
Thank you, guys. Thank you.
Great to see so many of you here.
Thank you. And by the way, can we use the stage? Because if there's any questions here, I'm happy to take them right now. If
we have 2 or 3 more speakers actually to get through in this segment.
They don't want me to talk to you guys.
But I'm sure you're going to be mingling. So
okay, I'll give you
go and say hi to Martin, but you won't get his phone number.